new school term, and I suppose you could make a case in point. We've all been there before. I certainly was. I wouldn't say I was worried to a certain degree going back to school. Probably didn't want to go back because I personally found school boring, but that's a different story for another day. Our guest today, Dr Angharad Rudkin, child clinical psychologist, going to give us a bit of an insight into, obviously it is a genuine concern that a lot of students are worried, and also some of them are losing sleep, which is not good. So welcome to the show, Dr Angharad. Great to have you on board.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
No, it's great to have you on board. And can you tell us a bit more about the research around the UK students worried about the new term? What's concerning for me is the number of students who are worried. It's keeping up at night, to be fair.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this survey was carried out with 1,000 children between the ages of 6 and 16, and it was carried out by PGL Beyond. And what they have found is that 1 in 5 children aren't getting any more than 8 hours sleep a night, which we know is not enough for developing children. But almost 70% were worried about school. They were anxious about going back to school, and they were anxious about sort of different bits of school. They were anxious about homework, about exams, about certain subjects. And also what this survey showed is that over half of them were anxious about how they looked, and also were uncertain about their future. So there's a lot of things on our kids' minds that are causing worries right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting sort of take on it. And I think that some of the worries have been there, you've mentioned there, I think, anecdotally from my experience, but there seems to be sort of new things that are popping up. And I know it's kind of off piece a little bit, but what do you put some of these, worries? I mean, for example, things like homework and making friends, I suppose that's always been there, but, I suppose that self-conscious type thing, is that maybe sort of correlating to, I'm sure it was always there, but could that be a correlation to also social media playing a part too, Doctor, that it does have an impact? It's not just being at school, it's obviously sort of, starting school and being away from school too.
Well, absolutely. And it's the things that are happening outside of school as well that will influence how you feel about yourself. So we know that children, there's constant entertainment and distraction on screens, so they're not having downtime, they're not having relaxed switch off time. But also we know with social media especially that there's a lot of comparisons, so they're looking at other people's lives and they're hearing about other people's lives and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not as pretty as that, or as fit as that, or as clever as that person, and my life doesn't look like theirs. So they're starting to feel like they're not good enough, and then they're taking that into school, that kind of low self-esteem. And when things happen at school, like they don't do well in a certain exam, or friends are a little bit mean to them, it can feel quite catastrophic for them, because they're thinking, I knew I wasn't good enough. So they're in a bit of a vicious cycle, really, of not feeling great about themselves, and then when things happen, not being able to cope with them. So I think we've got a big job on our hands as adults and parents and teachers and carers to really help promote resilience and self-esteem in our kids.
No, absolutely. And I think the other one that sort of talks about the uneasy about their future, that's sort of another concern, because generally speaking, young people up to a certain age are hedonistic. They sort of go there, they kind of enjoy that moment type thing, but that feeling uneasy about the future, I think, is a big concern, really. I know there's a lot of variables there. It's hard to isolate one variable. But what do you generally put that down to, Doctor? That's not great, really. I've always sort of argued the point, you shouldn't have to choose, a career path at 17. You should have a degree of flexibility. I think the pressure starts to build. What do you want to be when you grow up type thing. I think I would suggest that people kind of back off and with all this sort of what do you want to be when you grow up type thing. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's unrealistic expectations that our children, our teenagers know who they are, know what they want to do, and know how to get there. Whereas actually it's a very meandering path, and more than ever, there are so many options available that it's almost overwhelming for young people now. And we also know that the pandemic sort of curtailed a lot of independent stuff, so And things like the cost of living crisis and the price of rented accommodation and the price of going to uni now. There's a lot of things that young people are having to take account of in terms of what am I going to do next. And it is a bit uncertain. And what we do know is that when we don't have certainty, we are more likely to feel anxious. So it's all kind of spinning round, really. They're feeling under pressure, but they're also not sure about where they're heading, so they feel anxious about that. So what we have to do is to try and create a little bit more certainty. And the only thing we can really control is ourselves and our little lives. So doing things that the survey found, that things that children do to make themselves feel better are listening to music, going out with friends, playing sports, reading a book. So these little things can be so important for our children to sort of learn how to soothe themselves, how to feel okay, how to bring their emotions down. So we need to encourage them to do that as the adults around them.
No, absolutely. That's a great point, because I'm guessing that a lot of young people would turn to maybe the iPad, and I suppose that's, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Obviously, all things in moderation, but I'm sensing that there'll be a number of young people who maybe sort of engage in sort of iPad and other things as well, and that can have its own detrimental effect too. Is that fair to say too, do you think, Doctor?
Yeah, definitely, because it's distracting, but it's not necessarily enriching. And so, PGL Beyond, they're an outdoor learning company. So being outside is such an important part of our well-being. So, and again, when you've got screens, it's so much easier just to stay inside, sit on your bed, sit on the sofa, and just look at a screen. Whereas just being outside, whether it's going on a trampoline, taking the dog for a walk, going to the local park, all of these things are really important for us to do, and we've kind of forgotten how good they are for us, really.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I suppose with that, one point of consideration, one of the main worries that I can see in the research is sort of homework. And, I've got quite a contentious, perspective on home. I'd abolish it, to be honest, but that's another story for another day. I don't see why a young person or anyone should go to school for that volume of hours and then have to go back, and I don't see the logic in it. And I'm not suggesting that young people listening don't do their homework, or parents. That's just my opinion. I'd rather they get home, spend time with family, get out and about, get some fresh air, and going forward. But I know it's another issue for another day. But in terms of sort of like, that social network being important, you've mentioned there, getting back and maybe, getting outside and getting in that fresh air. What are some key points? I mean, one positive here, I can see that, they do think teachers do listen and are supportive. What's your take on that? I know it's a lot to process, but what's your take on sort of this worry about homework, and teachers are being supportive? What can teachers do if maybe kids are struggling with their homework?
Well, it's a really big issue, isn't it? Because yes, you've got the sort of should kids even be doing homework, and then you've got the teachers who are having to set it and mark it, so it's extra work for them. But then you've got kids who, if they do find school quite stressful and unsatisfying, to then come home and have to keep doing schoolwork can feel really aggravating to them. And I know a lot of parents spend a lot of time trying to encourage force their children to do homework, and that can cause a lot of conflict and arguments. And the thing is with homework, it's a practice. That's what it's like. It's like doing your exercises at home. It's just a bit of practice. And if parents can help their kids learn that actually homework is just a little bit of what they need to do when they get home, but what you'll do afterwards is you'll go out for a walk, you'll go to the shops, you'll go and do some football. It can be one part of an evening. It doesn't have to take over the whole evening. I think that's a really important message that we give our kids, that we keep it in perspective, that it's just one thing that we do. No,
absolutely. And I think for me, from my experience, I've sort of done some sort of teaching myself, and I know it's a tough job teaching, and it's getting harder, and obviously sort of teachers are under pressure themselves, with targets and other things that sort of go with it too. But the point here is obviously that, for the most part, teachers are supportive as well, and they want the best for the students too. I suppose sort of, another story for another day, maybe it's time to change the education system, at least the way I see it. The modern world, it might not be conducive. Not evolution, evolve a little bit. But like you said, until that happens, and should that ever happen, we need to find practical ideas to help young people. The research is showing time and time again that they are worried, not just returning to school, but during school too. You've mentioned some practical things. Are there any sort of key takeaways or anywhere that our listeners can go, Doctor, to maybe have a look at some points and what they can do, what parents can potentially do and teachers can do to support the students? Because obviously we don't want young people to be, exposed them to some, obviously you can't, you've got to build some resilience, but it's in proportion to each situation. What are some steps that they can do, and where can they find some more research? I know you've done some great work yourself, so where can they go to find some information?
Well, so for more information, they can go to pgl.co.uk. Yeah. And in terms of the day-to-day, I think as parents, it's about acknowledging the feelings, but not letting them take over. So if someone is feeling anxious, acknowledging that, but not letting them avoid what's making them feel anxious, because that just makes it bigger. So, for example, if your child's worried about going to school, just gently encourage them to keep going, talk about all the nice things you're going to do afterwards, and just help them keep going with things that they get anxious about, because that's what builds up our resilience, is doing the things that scare us, that make us feel a bit worried sometimes. And just keeping an eye on your child, and also encouraging all the good stuff that is not about screens to help them feel better and connected and fit and healthy and balanced. It's a lot to do, but we can definitely do it if we all work together to just really spend time and attend to our kids and really notice what's going on for them.
No, absolutely. There's some sort of great points and great takeaways, and I think it's really important, like on top of that, we do hear, obviously there is that sort of notion among some people that, what is that term they use, it's snowflake nonsense really. And I think the reality is, to be fair, that young people, like you've mentioned there, I think there's been a lot that's gone on the last few years. I think they've had to really absorb, a lot of what's happened in the last few years. And I think it's really important to get a balanced perspective. Obviously, my generation, your generation before had our own challenges, but I think it's really important as a starting point to at least acknowledge that there are some new challenges, and we can do our best to sort of help them. That's all we can do going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. These are not children who are weak and fragile and unable to deal with things, which is often what is portrayed about this generation. These are kids who are trying their best to cope with a very tricky world right now, and with a very uncertain world, and with loads of pressures. So it's up to us as adults to help them as much as possible. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time, Dr. Angharad. It was really great speaking to you. It was really interesting and informative. No doubt listeners have found that as well. And I wish you a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you for having me on.